In this video, I shall try to share with my viewers my take on the Jewish-Palestinian conflict or the Israel-Hamas confrontation now raging in Gaza. This is not a military issue. This is not even a political issue. Unfortunately, the basic problem is that the issue that seems to be chronic and insolvable is not understood in the right spirit. And the reason why it seems insolvable is precisely that it is not understood in the right context. What then is the Israel-Palestine issue? Fundamentally, it is a religious issue. Rather, it's a pseudo-religious issue for which there is no religious solution. Now, let me explain what I mean. You'll have to follow my argument, my logic very carefully, lest I am misunderstood. The fundamental issue here is the incompatibility between the Jews and the Arabs. And because of this incompatibility, the idea that these two groups can live together in amity seems simply unrealistic. And therefore, the only solution seems to be, and that's what's playing out today, one party trying to eliminate the other. Each of the two contestants believes that their security and their survival rest entirely on the elimination of the other. The Hamas believes that the Jews have no right to exist. The Jews likewise believe that the Palestinians have no right to exist as a separate, independent or autonomous nation in their neighborhood, given the fact that their enmity is unending. Why does this enmity seem unending? It seems unending because it is an enmity which is rooted in pseudo-religion. Why do I say pseudo-religion? I say it's pseudo-religion because this idea that either you or me is fundamentally an idea that is enfolded in false religion. Now, there are two types of religions. One is a religion that is universal in its vision. We call it spirituality. The other is false religion or diabolical religion, which believes that God is a private property of separate groups and that each God is allergic to the other God. And therefore, your God mandates that you have a duty to root out and eliminate all other gods. You have a duty to be intolerant of other gods or people who believe in other gods. Alien and strange gods, as the favorite or familiar phrase puts it. Now, for example, going back several millennia in history, when the Jews were returning home from the Egyptian bondage, apparently God instructs them to exterminate the local residents of Canaan, who are the Palestinians, in order to create a land where only those who are loyal to the only genuine God, Jehovah, can live together, constituting a homogeneous, faithful, unpolluted, pure race. So, the incompatibility between the Jews and the Palestinians, the Jews and the Arabs, is something that is rooted in religion. Unfortunately, this religious issue has absolutely no religious solution. The only religious solution is what's being played out, which is the solution of one party eliminating the other. And that was a solution prescribed 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. That's the only solution in which both sides believe, and that's the reason why this conflict cannot be resolved. United Nations can pass any number of resolutions for what it likes, but nothing is going to work on the ground, for the simple reason that none of these resolutions takes into account the real nature of the problem at the origin, and therefore the possibility, or rather the impossibility, of resolving it politically. The only way this problem can be resolved forever, if at all there is a way, is the religious way, because it's a religious issue. And what is a religious way? The religious way is pointed out or demonstrated or preached to the world by Jesus of Nazareth. Change your idea of God, and thereby change your idea of yourself. Realize that God is not the parochial property of certain groups of people. God is not a racial construct. God is not a racial prop, nor is God a racial warrior. God is the universal creator, the father of all. He is the fountain spring of life, and God is also impartial. He loves all people, He values all people equally, and all are children of God, and therefore people must learn to live together in peace and in mutual love. And to me, the greatest pronouncement on world peace is love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. Please notice that all historical conflicts have been conflicts between neighbors. One of the lessons that history teaches us is that neighboring countries can never live at peace. Why? Because human beings have not developed yet, in spite of repeated bloodshed and unspeakable suffering, human beings have not developed the capacity to live together in peace as neighbors. And the local variant, the domestic variant of the same problem is the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law conflict, which is as serious as the Israel-Hamas conflict. In fact, more people have lost their mental balance, their mental health. More people have committed suicide. More homes have been ruined and wrecked because of this interminable problem, the incompatibility between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. And if that problem is not understood aright, it's impossible to devise solutions. You can't evolve a military solution to the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law problem. The Hamas-Israel problem is likewise. N number of wars may be fought, but the problem will never end. Israel is absolutely mistaken in assuming that A, they can eradicate Hamas, B, if they eradicate Hamas, the problem will be solved. In both these assumptions, Israel is dead wrong. Hamas cannot be and will not be eradicated, and even if Hamas is eradicated, peace will not be established in this region. I wonder what the idea of peace the Israelis have. Are we to believe that peace is the state in which one party is reduced to slavery, bondage, and all rights are taken away from them, and they are kept in bondage? Is that the idea of peace? What idea of peace is this? It's ridiculous that in this day and age, people can think of this as a state of peace. It's ridiculous. Now, therefore, if at all there is a solution, it is not the military solution, and the solution cannot be devised by the United Nations. United Nations might be able to bring about a temporary lull, but the problem will remain. It will continue to fester, and the conflicts will gain in intensity, and that's what you have seen from 1948 to this day. Now, in this context, let me also make my views known on two of the basic issues that have come up for discussion in connection with the Israeli attack or Israeli siege of Gaza. First is the idea of proportionality in the use of force. By the way, on the 7th of October, the Hamas on its own chose the path of violence. Now you must understand what it means. When Hamas chose the path of violence, it rejected the rule of law. If you know the history of the evolution of law, you realize that humanity has to choose between violence and law. Law and violence cannot coexist. So when Hamas resorted to violence as its problem-solving method, it rejected the rule of law. And today, of course, people say, well, you know, international law, international idea of human rights, so on and so forth. I'm not speaking on behalf of Israel. I don't speak on behalf of anyone. Israel doesn't need my support. Hamas doesn't need my support. I'm a free thinker. And I have bought my freedom at a very high price. So I'll exercise it. So when Hamas chose the path of violence on the 7th of October, it deliberately, voluntarily put itself outside the pale of law. Secondly, Hamas unleashed its power of destruction, its capacity for violence, to the maximum of its capacity. It's most important for all of us to remember, because these things are now completely forgotten. What was the world's reaction immediately after the 7th of October massacre? The whole world was surprised. The Hamas was able to wreak such vengeance on the unarmed Jews. And people were amazed that Hamas had the temerity as well as the means of violence that it displayed, exterminating about 1,400 Jews on a single day. You must realize that 1,400 people do not die on a single day in full-fledged war. Even today, even though Israel is unleashing unprecedented violence on Gaza, the daily toll is nowhere near this 1,400 mark. So it means that Hamas, when it got the chance, rejected the rule of law, chose the path of violence, and unleashed its capacity for violence to the maximum capacity. That much is very clear to anyone. Now consider the idea of proportionality. Now there are two ideas of proportionality. One is, if Hamas kills 5 people, Israel can kill 5 people, 5 Arabs. That's the idea of proportionality. But I think that's a stupid idea of proportionality, because this idea of proportionality will only perpetuate and encourage reckless violence. Because for Palestinians, losing 5 people for the sake of killing 5 Jews is big gain, great publicity. For Hamas, it's the ultimate achievement. Because the extent to which human life, unfortunately this is the case, it should not be the case, but that's how it is. The extent to which life is valued varies from one group to another. The value that the Jews attach to human life far outweighs the extent to which Hamas values the life of Palestinians. I can give you a number of evidence for it, but then if I go into those things, my main line of thought will be obfuscated. So this idea of proportionality, that 5 on this side and 5 on that side would meet the idea of proportionality, a tooth for an eye for an eye. Now that's not the only idea of proportionality. Now I'm going to suggest another idea of proportionality because it's not being talked about. That is the proportionality of capacity. First is the proportionality of numbers. The second is the proportionality of the capacity for violence. That is to say, proportionality in this context would mean that if Hamas unleashed its violence to the full capacity of its destructive power on the 7th of October, Israel has the right to unleash the full capacity of its power of destruction in retaliation. And that's exactly what's happening today. And of course, that works to the disadvantage of Hamas and the people who are suffering under the iron boots of Hamas. And therefore, now there is a great hue and cry. When I say this, my heart continues to bleed for the plight of the Palestinians. I have made that very clear in 2 of the previous videos done in Malayalam. So don't get me wrong, I'm only examining facts without any sentiments involved. You can't resort to the path of violence and then lay down the conditions of law thereafter. That's simply foolish. I am surprised that the international community, particularly the thinkers of the world, completely overlook this. To the best of my knowledge, no one has said this particular point that I'm sharing with you. So this idea of proportionality must be examined, because the second idea of proportionality that I share with you is what is in agreement with the idea of deterrence. Deterrence. Israel envisages its retaliation in terms of deterrence. Israel has a doctrine of its defense. Israel is not acting indiscriminately, impulsively, just wild hysterical reaction. No, Israel has a well-defined doctrine of deterrence. That is to say, it's not a tooth for a tooth, but it's a jaw for a tooth. And this is not what I'm saying, it's what they themselves have said. So they are simply following or implementing their doctrine of defense, which is based on deterrence, not proportionality of violence. So it's up to you, it's up to the international community to respond in terms of either the idea of proportionality, which Israel will never accept. I guarantee you that Israel will never accept. The only doctrine or the only criterion by which the situation can be understood as acceptable to the Jews is the idea of deterrence, because Israel cannot, as I said in my previous video, Israel cannot afford to have this chronic infection of violence across the border from Hamas. That's the first part, the idea of proportionality. The second is the idea of the impunity that institutions of care must enjoy in wartime. For example, Israel is now attacking Al-Shifa hospital, which is Gaza's largest hospital, most modern hospital. When I see the facilities in that hospital, I feel actually ashamed of myself that my country does not have anything that's comparable. This my state of Kerala has nothing comparable to the excellent facilities in Al-Shifa hospital. Well, I should not be jealous of the Palestinians, but I'm just saying this as a matter of aside. Now there, I quite agree that no hospital should be attacked, and I certainly insist that those who are under treatment for whatever reasons in a hospital must be protected. But the problem is this: once a hospital is turned overtly or covertly into a center for war strategy, then it is no longer a hospital, it is a legitimate target of attack. About that, I don't have the slightest doubt. Now, if you do not want that miserable predicament, you should make sure that the hospital, the integrity and the inviolability of the hospital is not compromised. But unfortunately, the authorities of the hospital are in no position to defy the diktat of Hamas. Hamas will do whatever it wants. So then you reach a very intriguing situation in which Hamas is free to convert a hospital into a strategic war room and then claim protection for that war room, which is a legitimate object of attack, under pretext that on top of it there sits a hospital. Now, this is bunkum. No self-respecting army in the world, no army which is keen to realize its goals as the Israeli Defense Forces is, will ever buy that argument. Unfortunately, in the process, many patients will be killed. Many babies will die. You know, if you watch Al Jazeera all the time, it's focusing on babies. Yeah, of course, babies are there. Nobody wants baby to die. But if babies die, in my opinion, the main responsibility for that rests with Hamas and the hospital authorities, who together agreed that it should also serve as a war room. So on these two issues I have absolutely not. But again, I want to conclude by placing on record my great sadness at the human tragedy unfolding in Gaza. I wish it hadn't happened this way, but I know that going by the logic of history, it had to happen this way. But I only pray that through this massive and monumental human suffering, there will be some radical thinking on the issue, and that light will dawn on the international community as well as the violent players of this bloody drama as to how to create a future that's free from these convulsions. And for the sake of the people of Gaza as well as the people of Israel, I hope and pray that it happens. For the Jews in particular, it's no achievement to create a permanent enemy, a bloodthirsty enemy, which believes that it has a sacred duty to eliminate all the Jews. And in creating this kind of monomaniacal outlook, the Jews have played their role. There is no doubt about it. The Jews have played a role. They made their own contributions to creating this attitude by which the Palestinians believe that they can live in peace only if the Jews are exterminated. So unless and until both parties realize the folly on which they have embarked, this situation will continue, the bloodletting will continue, thousands more will die, and there is no point in the international community splashing its sentimentality on the scene, saying, oh, you know, international conventions must be respected, so on and so forth. By which international convention did Hamas attack the unarmed Jews on the 7th of October? Is the international community today in a position to say to Israel, please stop firing, go home, we'll make sure that nobody comes across the border and kills your unarmed innocent civilians? Can any agency in the world, including the United Nations, any power in the world, including United States or China, take upon themselves such a responsibility? Cannot. Therefore, what contributions do they have? What moral right, what sensible authority do they have in dictating this, that and the other? Once two parties choose on their own to take to the path of violence, the only thing that can happen is leave them to settle their quarrel, because none of them is willing to abide by international law, none of them is willing to respect human rights. Then only one thing remains: the decisive factor of violence. Might becomes right when rule of law is rejected, as Hamas did reject on the 7th of October. That's precisely where I stand. I hope that were not the case, but unfortunately that is the reality. And unless and until we tell the truth, we do not do any good to anyone. That's the reason why I thought, at the risk of becoming very unpopular with people, and in fact of provoking my Muslim brothers and sisters in India, particularly in Kerala, I thought I would place my views on record. This is precisely what I think about the issue. This is a pseudo-religious issue for which a wrong solution is sought in the wrong way, which is the military way. No solution has ever been found with the power of the wall, power of the sword, or the booming of the gun. A solution has to be found according to the nature of the problem, which is not being talked about, which is not being regarded. If the Palestinian issue is understood right, I can tell you that there will be a global awareness of the need to reform religions, treat religions, heal them of their madness. It is the madness of religion that is now manifesting itself as unprecedented bloodshed on that tiny stretch of human misery called Gaza. It's sad, but that's how it is. There it is.